They poured engine oil on a black woman at work. Her billionaire husband walks in and fires everyone. The auto shop on Jefferson Avenue smelled of grease and ambition, its air heavy with the clank of tools and the low growl of engines. Benita Carter, 32, stood at her workbench, her hands steady as she rebuilt a carburetor with the precision of a surgeon. Her navy coveralls, patched but pristine, bore her name in red stitching, Benita. She was the only black woman in Motorworks Auto, a gritty Detroit shop where 6 white men, her coworkers, grumbled through their shifts. They called her the wizard behind her back, a nickname laced with equal parts awe and resentment. Benita didn't care. She loved the work, the logic of machinery, the triumph of turning a sputter into a roar. It was her sanctuary, her proof that she belonged. But today, the shop crackled with something sinister. Benita felt it in the sidelong glances, the too loud laughter, the way her tools kept vanishing only to reappear hours later. She'd endured their microaggressions for years, coffee mugs left dirty, her locker accidentally jammed. But this was different. The air was charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. She pushed it down, focusing on the carburetor's delicate screw. Don't let them win, she thought. You're better than this. Benita had grown up in Detroit's East Side, where dreams were as scarce as unbroken sidewalks. Her father, a bus driver, taught her to fix engines in their cramped garage, his hands guiding hers over wrenches and bolts. Machines don't lie, Benita, he'd said. They reward the truth. Her mother, a nurse, filled her with stories of black women who'd defied the odds. Sojourner Truth, Mae Jemison. When Benita earned her mechanic's certification at 20, her parents framed it, hanging it above the fireplace. Now, both gone, her father to cancer, her mother to a stroke, Benita carried their lessons in her bones. She was their legacy, and she'd be damned if she let a few bitter men dim her light. It was just past noon when the air shifted. Benita was under a lifted Chevy inspecting a fuel line when she heard footsteps, multiple, deliberate. She slid out, wiping her hands on a rag, and stood to face 4 of her coworkers: Jake, Mitch, Tommy, and Carl. Jake, the shop's unofficial alpha, held a metal can of engine oil, its spout catching the fluorescent light. His grin was sharp, predatory, his blue eyes glinting with malice. Mitch, wiry and quiet, shifted uneasily. Tommy's face was flushed, his excitement barely contained. Carl, the shop's jokester, smirked, his phone already in hand. "Need something?" Benita asked, her voice steady though her pulse quickened. She stood tall, her 5'9" frame unbowed, her dark eyes meeting Jake's without flinching. Jake tilted his head, the can glinting. "Just thought you could use a little shine," he said, his voice thick with mockery. The others laughed. Tommy's a hyena's cackle, Carl's a low chuckle. Mitch looked at the floor, his jaw tight. Benita's stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. "Get back to work," she said, turning back to the Chevy. "Don't engage. Don't give them the satisfaction." But then it came, a cold, viscous torrent pouring over her head, soaking her braids, her face, her coveralls. Engine oil, black and acrid, burned her eyes and coated her skin. The smell was suffocating, a chemical assault that made her gag. She stumbled back, gasping, as the oil dripped down her neck, pooling on the concrete floor. Laughter exploded around her, jagged and cruel. Jake tossed the empty can aside, its clatter echoing like a gunshot. "Now you fit in," he jeered. Tommy clutched his stomach, doubled over. Carl snapped photos, his phone flashing. Mitch stood frozen, his eyes wide but silent. Benita's hands trembled at her sides, the oil seeping into her clothes, her skin, her soul. Her vision blurred, not just from the oil, but from tears she refused to shed. She wanted to scream, to swing, to burn the shop to the ground. But she didn't move. She stood there, drenched and humiliated, because Benita Carter had learned long ago that survival meant choosing when to fight. And this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Well, she asked, her voice low, cutting through the laughter. It wasn't a plea, it was a blade. The room stilled. Jake's grin faltered, but he shrugged. Just a prank, Benita. Don't be so sensitive. A prank. The word was a slap, reopening wounds she'd spent years stitching shut. She saw her father's tired eyes after a double shift, her mother's clenched fists when a patient called her a slur. She saw herself at 16, turned away from a shop internship because you don't look like a mechanic. And now this. Oil on her skin, laughter in her ears, reminding her she was still just a black woman in their world. The shop's front door chimed, slicing through the tension. Heavy footsteps approached, measured and commanding. Benita didn't turn, but she felt the shift, the way the air seemed to bow. Her coworkers' laughter died, their faces paling. Benita? The voice was deep, warm, edged with concern. It belonged to Gabriel Carter, her husband. Gabriel was a force of nature, a man who reshaped rooms just by entering them. At 40, he stood 6'4", his broad shoulders filling out a tailored navy suit. His skin, the color of polished mahogany, glowed under the shop's lights, and his eyes, sharp, unyielding, could silence a boardroom or melt Benita's defenses. His watch, a Patek Philippe, was worth more than the shop's inventory, but he wore it with the ease of someone who'd earned every cent. Gabriel was the founder of Carter Tech, a green energy empire that powered half the Midwest. To the world, he was a billionaire titan. To Benita, he was the man who'd proposed to her in a diner over burnt coffee, who'd built her a workshop in their backyard because he knew her soul lived in engines. They'd met 5 years ago at a charity gala, Benita there as a guest of her mentor, a retired mechanic who championed her career. She'd been out of place in her borrowed dress, dodging small talk, when Gabriel approached, a glass of bourbon in hand. "You're the one who rebuilt a '67 Mustang in 3 weeks," he'd said, no question in his voice. She'd raised an eyebrow, ready to deflect, but his smile, genuine, disarming, stopped her. They talked for hours, about torque and turbines, about dreams, and the weight of being black in spaces that didn't want you. By the end of the night, she'd given him her number. A year later, they were married. Now, Gabriel stopped short, his eyes locking on Benita. She stood drenched in oil, her braids heavy, her coveralls ruined. His gaze swept over her, then to the men behind her, their guilt written in their stiff postures. The empty can lay at Jake's feet, a silent confession. Gabriel's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. When he spoke, his voice was low, a storm gathering. What happened here? Benita wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the oil. "It's nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. She didn't want Gabriel to fight this for her. She'd always stood on her own, and she wouldn't let these men take that from her. "Nothing?" Gabriel's voice rose, his eyes blazing. "This is nothing?" He stepped closer, his presence a tidal wave. The men shrank back, their bravado crumbling. Jake opened his mouth, but Gabriel cut him off. Don't you dare speak." He turned to Benita, his expression softening, though the anger still burned beneath. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice now just for her, tender and raw. She nodded, her throat tight. "I'm fine, Gabriel, I can handle it." "I know you can," he said, his eyes searching hers. "But you shouldn't have to, not like this." Gabriel faced the men again, his gaze cold as steel. "Who did this?" he demanded. Silence. Jake shifted, his eyes darting to the others, but no one spoke. Gabriel's lips curled into a humorless smile. "All of you, then." He pulled out his phone, his movements precise, and dialed. "Lydia," he said when the call connected, his voice clipped. "Pull the ownership records for Motorworks Auto on Jefferson." "Yes, now." He paused, listening. "Good, buy it. Full price, expedited. I want the deed in my name by end of day." Another pause. "And send a cleanup crew, hazmat gear, this place is a disgrace." He hung up, pocketing the phone. Benita's eyes widened. Gabriel, what are you? He held up a hand, his focus still on the men. This shop? It's mine now, or it will be in a few hours. And you? He pointed at Jake, then swept his finger across the group. You're fired. All of you, get out. The men erupted, their voices a desperate chorus. You can't do that, Tommy shouted, his face red. We've got rights, Carl added, his phone still in hand. Mitch, pale as a ghost, said nothing, his eyes fixed on the floor. Gabriel ignored them, turning to Benita. Let's get you cleaned up, he said softly. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders, shielding her from the oil and their stares. She didn't need the gesture. She was strong enough to walk out alone, but she let him, seeing the pain in his eyes. They moved toward the door. Jake lunged forward, his voice shrill. This is bullshit. You think you can just waltz in here with your money and... Gabriel spun, his hand shooting out to grab Jake's collar. He lifted the smaller man off the ground, his strength effortless. You don't get to talk, Gabriel growled. You poured oil on my wife. You humiliated her. You're lucky I'm only firing you. He dropped Jake, who stumbled back, gasping. Benita touched Gabriel's arm. Enough, she said quietly. Let's go. He looked at her, his anger softening, and nodded. They walked out together. The doors chimed, the last sound they heard from the shop. Outside, the spring air was sharp, cutting through the oil's stench. Gabriel's black Tesla gleamed in the lot, a symbol of the world he'd built. Benita stopped, pulling the jacket tighter around her. The oil clung to her skin, a reminder of the violation. She felt raw, exposed, but she refused to break. Gabriel opened the passenger door, but she shook her head. I'll ruin the seats. I don't care about the seats, he said, his voice firm. Get in. She hesitated, then slid inside. Gabriel climbed in beside her, the engine humming softly. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of the day pressing down. I'm sorry, Gabriel said, his hands gripping the steering wheel. I should have been there sooner. This isn't on you, Benita said, her voice steady. It's on them. He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and fury. Seeing you like that... He trailed off, his voice breaking. I wanted to tear them apart. I know, she said, reaching for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and ground. But you didn't. You did something better. Did I? He asked, his voice heavy. Firing them, buying the shop. It doesn't erase what they did. It doesn't take away the hurt. No, she admitted, but it's a start. They drove to their estate on the city's outskirts, a modern oasis of glass and steel. Gabriel had called ahead, and a team was waiting, professionals trained to handle hazardous materials. They helped Benita clean up, disposing of her oil-soaked clothes and washing her hair with care. She stood under the shower for an hour, letting the water rinse away the oil and the shame. When she emerged, wrapped in a soft robe, Gabriel was in their bedroom, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. Better? He asked, his voice gentle. Getting there, she said, sitting beside him on the bed. She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They sat in silence, the kind that held years of understanding. Benita's mind churned, replaying the oil, the laughter, the weight of their hate. But she also thought of Gabriel's response. The way he'd taken control, not just for her but for justice. It wasn't perfect, nothing could undo the violation, but it was power, and she felt it stirring in her too. What happens to the shop now? She asked. Gabriel looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. It's yours if you want it. Her eyes widened. Mine? I bought it for you, he said. Run it, rebuild it, turn it into something new, or sell it, burn it down, whatever you want, it's your call. Benita laughed, the sound surprising her. Burn it down sounds tempting. He chuckled, kissing her forehead. I'd bring the matches. She thought about it, the idea taking root. A shop of her own, staffed with people who respected her, who shared her passion, a place where no one would feel the way she did today. It was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. I want to rebuild it, she said finally. But not just for me. For others like me, people who've been pushed out, overlooked. I want a shop that's a beacon, Gabriel, a place where skill matters more than skin. He nodded, his eyes shining with pride. Then that's what we'll do. Together. The next morning, Benita woke to chaos. Gabriel's acquisition of Motorworks was plastered across every news outlet, his statement unapologetic. The former employees of Motorworks engaged in a racist act against my wife, Benita Carter. They've been terminated, and the shop will be transformed to promote diversity and excellence. Social media exploded. Hashtags for Benita and Carter Power trended globally. Benita's story, her talent, her resilience became a rallying cry. She avoided the news, but Gabriel showed her the messages flooding in. Support from strangers, mechanics of color, women who'd faced similar hate. A young black girl from Chicago wrote, "I want to be a mechanic like you." Benita's eyes stung as she read it. She hadn't asked for this spotlight, but she felt its weight, its potential. The men who'd poured the oil faced their own fallout. Jake's face, caught in Carl's photos, went viral, a symbol of bigotry. Their names were dragged through the mud, their careers in tatters. Mitch issued a public apology, claiming he'd been caught up in the moment. Benita didn't respond. She was too busy planning. Over the next 6 months, she threw herself into rebuilding the shop. Gabrielle provided resources, but Benita led the charge, hiring architects, interviewing mechanics, designing a space that was both functional and inspiring. She named it Carter's Auto Works, a nod to her family's legacy. The team she assembled was diverse. Black, Latino, women, queer, each chosen for their skill and heart. She trained them herself, her father's lessons guiding her hands. The grand opening was a triumph. The shop gleamed, its bays equipped with cutting-edge tools, its walls adorned with murals of Detroit's history. Community leaders, industry giants, and hundreds of supporters filled the lot. Benita stood at a podium, her braids gleaming, her voice steady. "This shop isn't just about fixing cars," she said. "It's about fixing systems. It's about building a future where no one is judged by their skin, only by their work. We're here to make things right, one engine, one life at a time." The crowd roared, and Gabriel stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes full of love. Benita looked out at the faces, black, white, brown, young, old, and felt something shift. The oil was gone, washed away by purpose. In its place was power. Hers and hers alone. As the ribbon was cut, Benita knew she'd won, not just for herself, but for every person who'd been told to stay small. She'd taken their hate and built a legacy, and that was victory enough.